Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Legal Geeks. With me, as usual, is my partner in geekdom, Joshua Gilliland. Hey, Josh.
Cheers, Jessica.
And today we're here to discuss a great kind of cult classic from the 80s, a TV show called Quantum Leap. Right, Josh?
Yeah, I will always have a special place in my heart for Quantum Leap. I absolutely
Oh,
love that show. Well done, Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell. Ultimate bromance and exceptionally well done.
I'm a big fan of Bakula, of course, and I love the idea of using the quantum kind of physics loosely, obviously, for time travel. Speaking of the time travel, explain to those who haven't seen Quantum Leap, how did they do the time travel in Quantum Leap?
Well, you could only travel within your lifetime, and there was one big
Huh?
exception to that in one episode. But you basically, the beginning of your life and then the end of your life. And if you that was a string and you bunched it all together, you could travel to any point within the string. And so, which made the TV show very convenient because you basically dealt with somebody born in the 50s, and thus you're able to touch on everything, relatively current so people would remember it because it covered lives from the 50s up through, the late 80s. And so they really didn't touch anything in the 90s that I remember, but there might be a one-off in there someplace. But it was a very focused time period, and so people could be nostalgic about the 50s or 60s, 70s, and 80s in that 40-year period.
All right, cool. Much better than going back to the time of dinosaurs or something, or forward to a future you wouldn't recognize at all. I wonder if the 90s episode, if they'd had flannel and grunge, I would have been very impressed.
Yes, they did, because it overlapped with the beginning of the 90s, so they might have touched on that, but I don't remember one. The big exception was he did leap back to his great grandfather during the Civil War, so like that was the one time they went beyond that, and with being a sci-fi show, they were able to explain it.
Oh, okay, and they had a credible explanation for that one?
Yeah, because his grandfather, great grandfather, had the same name, and there was enough in common that somehow that worked out. So, but
Okay.
it was during the Civil War, so that was their Civil War episode.
Ah, cool. Well, today we're here to discuss a special episode called So Help Me God. And tell me a little bit, what were the legal issues involved in that specific episode?
Well, you got to keep in mind it took place in 1957. So the story begins on July 29th, 1957, with an alleged crime that took place on June 15th, 1957. So if we look at the slides with this person who's, a African American woman who's charged with murdering the son of the most powerful man in town, and she worked for the family. She's arrested without knowledge of her right to counsel. There's a confession signed without, the assistance of counsel, and she's illiterate. We have issues with the state initially refusing to produce the confession, the police file, and the medical examiner report. And we do have Scout Bakula do a nice Perry Mason type yelling at someone for that, and threatening to go to, the federal courts to go out and get it. And then there are issues with jury selection because the jury that's initially impaneled is all white, and you
Mm.
have an African American on trial in 1957. And so those are the, just the right out of the gate issues. Someone who is a true criminal defense attorney, I am not one, might be able to pick out more and additional problems that they had with it. But there were definite Fifth and Sixth Amendment issues throughout the story.
So, what was the status of the right to counsel and the right against self-incrimination in the story and at that time?
Well, since we were dealing with time travel, I put together a linear approach to this. And when you look at, this is the beginning of the Sixth Amendment issues, and then we end with, how it ties into the Fifth Amendment issues. So in 1932, you had the Powell v. Alabama Supreme Court case, which developed the special circumstances test for having the right to counsel, which stated that you end up with the right to counsel in capital cases.
Mm.
Okay, so it wasn't in all of them, but it's still a very, very important opinion because it's the beginning. And
Yeah.
then we have a World War II era case. It was 1942, and that's the Betts v. Brady decision. And so like that's important because we have right to counsel issues and guys who didn't have counsel, that was found to be okay. You then have 1957 with our story that takes place. And then after 57, we start getting into the law that defines how we are as a country today. We have Gideon v. Wainwright, which deals with the wonderful issues of right to counsel, and the fun movie, I think it's with Henry Fonda for Gideon's Trumpet. And then you have the Miranda opinion that comes out in 1966. So this case takes place in between, before the good stuff comes in. We've established the right to counsel in a capital case. And apparently, since this story took place in Louisiana, it was established that the defendant did have an attorney. But just to highlight, Betts is a unfortunate opinion to read, and that came from the Supreme Court, because these guys are found guilty, and they don't have counsel at trial. And the court initially determined that the 14th Amendment did not strictly require that a defendant be appointed counsel at a trial for every criminal defense. And further stated that the inmate was not deprived of his liberty without due process of law, because the 6th Amendment guarantee of counsel only applied to trials in federal courts. The 14th Amendment did not incorporate that guarantee. So there was no right to state-appointed counsel in every case in which a defendant charged with a crime was unable to obtain counsel. Now, there's another justice on the Supreme Court when all this goes down, and that's Justice Black. And this irritated him. And there are some great Black opinions, just as there are some great Harlan, II opinions, and some other ones from this period. So if you're a connoisseur of Supreme Court opinions, the dissent in Betts is profoundly important, because he comes out swinging, and it's like it's one of those this is why I went to law school type moments. But the opening line is, a practice cannot be reconciled with common and fundamental ideas of fairness and right, which subjects innocent men to increased dangers of conviction merely because of their poverty. Whether a man is innocent cannot be determined from a trial in which, as here, denial of counsel has made it impossible to conclude without any satisfactory degree of certainty that the defendant's case was adequately presented. No one questions that due process requires a hearing before conviction and sentence for the serious crimes of robbery. And it goes on like that. Now, this is where, since these are lifetime appointments and, people live a long time, Black got even, because he ends up being writes for the majority in Gideon. And that overrules the Betts decision. It's a wonderful opinion. We won't go through it in detail for obvious reasons, but it's an absolutely fabulous opinion. And it's one of those things that helps define as we are as a country, because the idea of not having the right to counsel, or in state appointed counsel taking place, that if somebody gets into trouble, that it's like, sorry son, you have to go out and get your own attorney, and no, that just rubs us wrong. It sounds very police state-esque. And then 3 years afterwards, we have the Miranda decision. Now, since 1966, there have been tons of opinions dealing with Miranda, and even through the 2000s there have been several as well. But you cannot, we all know Miranda rights from TV shows. It's been ingrained upon our culture, and there are all these weird cases out there with police getting people they've arrested to confess to things, subverting the right to counsel. One of the recent Supreme Court decisions that I believe was was a ugly practice of the police forcing someone into confession. They would talk to them, and after getting the confession, they would then read them their Miranda rights, and then get them to waive their Miranda rights and confess again. And the Supreme Court of the United States said, no, you don't get to do that. And so there are good law and order, arguments about Miranda and the right to, out there, because we don't want bad people on the streets, committing crimes, and there are statistics out there that highlight the danger of that. On the flip side, the idea that only criminals have to fear the police state tends to rub people the wrong way. So this is one of those things that's pretty well ingrained in our culture, on what we believe in as civil society. And the Quantum Leap episode is just a lot of fun because it lands in between that. And so in 1957, we have, those cases are working their way through the courts, and there are things happening. We have great prosperity in the 50s, but we also have horrible things happening in the civil rights movement with repressment of citizens. So Quantum Leap always did a beautiful job at tugging at heartstrings on those issues, and they did it in a beautiful way. And so I was a big fan. I enjoyed it growing up. Loved the Homecoming Part 2 episode, and it was a great show. So hats off to everyone who did it, and it was nice seeing the courtroom drama version of Quantum Leap, where they got to play Perry Mason and have all of those great courtroom scenes.
There's that. My favorite thing too about time travel shows that go to the past, and Quantum Leap in this episode is a perfect example of that, is it always reinforces my opinion that I am happiest right now, right here, that the good old days really weren't so good. So I'm like, there were serious issues and problems, and yeah, I think it's good to remind people of where we were before a lot of these Supreme Court decisions came out, and how different things were, and things that we take for granted right now, certain rights were not there, especially for large swaths of the population, especially poorer people, not too many decades ago. So well done, Quantum Leap.
Yeah, they did a great job. And even though I do, watching the ones that hit on the 80s and the late 70s, which overlapped with my childhood, always made me feel reminiscent of home and those days gone by. So, but it was a great show.
It was a good show. Well, thank you, Josh. That's quite the education. I love that on right to counsel, and that's right against self-incrimination, and that's very important. Those are kind of like basic, important, some of our most important principles. So that was a lot of fun. I love tying that into a great 80s cult classic TV show. So yay, well done.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. And so look forward to another adventure, and see you soon.
Bye, Josh. Take